Ramses' cruelty provoked divine anger, leading God to strike Egypt with 10 devastating plagues. The first of these began with the Nile turning to blood as chaos erupted silently beneath its surface. Agitated crocodiles burst from the river, attacking every creature in sight, even turning on each other. Boats were overturned, people dragged under, and the waters turned thick and red with blood. All aquatic life perished, and a foul stench filled the land as the Nile's poison spread. As the tainted waters reached the farmlands, crops rotted overnight, ushering in the second plague, famine. Fields once full of promise were now barren, and months of labor vanished in a single night. Desperate, Ramses turned to the high priestess, begging her to call upon the Egyptian gods, but the gods remained silent, offering no relief to the suffering people. And so, the third plague descended, more terrifying than the ones before. After the Nile turned to blood and famine struck the land, another strange plague emerged. Frogs began flooding Egypt. Forced out of their drying habitats, countless frogs leapt from lakes and rivers, invading homes and palaces alike. They filled kitchens, climbed onto beds, and even reached the chambers of the royal family. The queen screamed in horror, but Ramses brushed it off, saying, "They're just frogs." But the situation worsened. As the frogs died in large numbers from dehydration, their corpses began to rot. Mountains of decaying frog bodies attracted swarms of maggots, giving rise to the next curse: flies. The flies multiplied rapidly, blackening the skies and contaminating whatever food was left. No matter how hard people tried, with fire, smoke, or cloth, the flies couldn't be driven away. The entire land reeked of death, and people struggled to breathe, covering their faces in despair. Ramses, finally feeling pressure, summoned a wise man to find a solution. The man claimed the flies would disappear once the dead frogs were gone. But these weren't ordinary flies. They bit the skin, causing wounds and serious infections. Soon, the fifth plague struck. Painful boils broke out on people's bodies. Those bitten by flies developed swelling and pus-filled sores. Even Ramses, the queen, and all nobles were not spared. With medicine powerless, the people could only suffer. Some, especially the poor, died where they lay. All of Egypt was plunged into fear, confusion, and complete helplessness. Just then, a guard entered leading a white horse bearing a chilling message written in blood. The writing read, "These plagues are sent by God. Free the 400,000 Hebrews immediately, or face even greater suffering." For centuries, ever since Egyptian rule began over the Hebrews, they had been enslaved, forced to build great monuments. Their labor helped Egypt grow strong and wealthy, especially under Pharaoh Ramses II. When Ramses II came to power, he forced all Hebrews to work endlessly on his tomb, day and night. Many perished from exhaustion and cruelty during the harsh labor. Those who grew weak or ill were mercilessly burned alive by Ramses's orders. This cruelty enraged the God of the Hebrews, who revealed himself to a man named Moses. Through a vision, God instructed Moses to free the Hebrews and lead them out of Egypt's suffering. To force Ramses' hand, God unleashed 10 powerful plagues upon Egypt. Despite the terrifying signs, Ramses refused to yield. Instead of listening, he declared himself a god and increased the suffering of the Hebrews. As time passed, more and more Hebrews began to die from the exhausting and brutal labor forced upon them. It was no longer just suffering. It had become a confrontation between Ramses and the God of the Hebrews. This defiance enraged the Hebrew God, who responded with the sixth punishment. A deadly disease struck all of Egypt's livestock. From sacred bulls to everyday farm animals, nothing was spared. They began to die rapidly. This new blow devastated the Egyptian people, yet Ramses still remained stubborn. Desperate for answers, he once again summoned the royal advisor. But the advisor, unable to grasp the cause of the disaster, gave another vague explanation. He claimed that once the decaying bodies attracted insects and those insects vanished, the crisis would pass. Ramses, filled with rage, could no longer listen to excuses. He had the advisor executed immediately. Still hoping for divine help, Ramses turned to the high priestess, but she confessed that her prayers to the Egyptian gods had gone unanswered. Infuriated by what he saw as useless superstition, Ramses also ordered her execution. Just then, the skies above Egypt began to change. Something even more terrible was coming. During the night, intense thunder roared, lightning flashed across the sky, and hailstones as large as fists pounded down across Egypt. The statue of the goddess standing tall in the city square was shattered, and many homes were reduced to rubble. Farmers working in the fields were struck by the hail, many injured and some killed. Whatever crops had survived previous disasters were now completely ruined. The arrival of such massive hail during a hot, dry day clearly showed it was no natural event. It was the seventh divine punishment, the plague of hail. But even after this destruction, Ramses refused to yield. Instead of fear, he responded with greater rage, inviting even worse consequences. Moses saw the devastation unfold before his eyes, and sorrow filled his heart. His faith wavered. He cried out to the sky, questioning why innocent people continued to die. He couldn't understand who was truly being punished by these plagues. With no reply from above, Moses left in anger and despair. But God appeared behind him, reminding Moses that his earlier advice had gone unheeded. As the weather shifted suddenly, the cooler air helped dormant insect eggs to hatch. This brought on the eighth plague, a terrifying invasion of locusts. The skies darkened as massive swarms descended, leaving people no choice but to abandon their harvest and flee. The locusts devoured every green thing in sight, causing total crop failure across vast lands. An estimated 15 million square kilometers of farmland was left barren. The locusts moved straight from the wilderness into Egypt's cities, even invading Ramses' palace. They consumed everything within reach, forcing the so-called God King to hide in fear. He could only stand by and watch as his land and people suffered. A military commander advised Ramses to open the granaries to aid the starving population during the crisis. The plan was to recover the losses later by raising taxes. However, the selfish Ramses feared his own interests would be threatened and outright rejected the idea. When word spread that food wouldn't be given, desperate and hungry civilians stormed the granary. They grabbed whatever they could, using pots and pans to collect the grain in panic. In the chaos, a farmer stumbled, and the torch he was carrying fell, setting the granary on fire. The flames quickly spread, destroying all the grain stored inside. Even though some people escaped with food, they couldn't escape Ramses' wrath. Soldiers had already surrounded the area and were ordered to kill all the looters. Without mercy, arrows were fired, and the unarmed civilians were slaughtered. The entire place turned into a field of blood. Ramses watched it all in silence. This brutal massacre enraged the god of the Hebrews once more. Suddenly, a thunderbolt from the sky struck, wiping out Ramses' entire guard unit. At that moment, complete darkness fell upon Egypt. This was the ninth plague, the plague of darkness. This darkness was likely caused by intense sandstorms, after the locusts had stripped the land of all vegetation. For 3 full days and nights, Egypt was wrapped in thick, blinding darkness. At last, Ramses began to feel a trace of fear. But after a brief moment of fear, Ramses' emotions turned to fury. When Moses came to plead once more, Ramses threatened that if the disasters didn't stop, he would create his own plague. He declared that all Hebrew children unable to walk would be drowned in the Nile River. Horrified, Moses turned to God, begging him to end the suffering, as innocent people were dying. But God, filled with wrath, reminded Moses that the Hebrews had suffered 400 years of slavery and cruelty without pity. When Moses learned that the 10th plague would be the most devastating of all, he hesitated to continue. But to prove his divine authority, God suddenly tore through the night with blinding lights across the sky. Panicked, Moses rushed to Ramses to warn him. If he didn't let the Hebrews go, Egypt would face massive death. Still, Ramses laughed off the warning and angrily banished Moses from his court. As Moses left, he quietly warned Ramses to protect his own child that night. Ramses felt a flicker of fear, but dismissed it as just another threat. Meanwhile, Moses instructed all Hebrews to slaughter a lamb that night and smear its blood on their doors. He told them to stay inside their homes and not step outside until morning. Although Ramses had no idea what was about to unfold, the signs of a final reckoning were already in motion. Ramses felt a sudden unease and quickly lit all the oil lamps in the palace. He stood guard beside his child, holding the royal sword firmly in his hand. Confident and defiant, Ramses believed that humans could overcome fate. As night deepened, a dark and frightening force slowly covered all of Egypt. The 10th plague, the plague of the firstborn, quietly descended upon the land. Because the Hebrews had smeared lamb's blood on their doorframes earlier, God's judgment passed over their homes. However, the firstborn of every Egyptian family, along with their livestock, mysteriously died overnight. Even Ramses' own son was not spared from this fate. Holding his child in despair, Ramses could not accept the harsh reality. Throughout Egypt, the cries of grieving parents echoed loudly. Thus, the plague of the firstborn took its terrible toll. Previous plagues had caused food shortages, and the top layer of stored grain had become contaminated with fungi due to insect droppings and dust. In ancient Egypt, it was customary for the eldest son to eat first and receive double portions. Thus, the contaminated food on the top was consumed by the eldest sons, while the rest of the family ate the uncontaminated grain below. Struck by such a calamity, Ramses could no longer bear it. The next day, he confronted Moses, demanding to know why they had done such a thing. He questioned how these actions could be from God and accused them of killing children. Moses was silent for a moment, then calmly pointed out that not a single Hebrew child had died the previous night. This revelation terrified Ramses deeply. At last, Ramses understood that the Hebrew God was a power beyond his control, greater than all Egyptian gods. In his fury, Ramses yelled at Moses, commanding him to take all the Hebrews and leave Egypt for their promised land, Canaan. At last, 400,000 Hebrews were freed from slavery. Moses accomplished his mission and led the large group on their long-awaited journey home, freeing them from centuries of harsh oppression. Meanwhile, back in his palace, Ramses sadly buried his son, while the queen had already lost her mind. Though her child was gone, she kept desperately rocking an empty cradle. Ramses's hatred grew deep inside, and he refused to accept this bitter truth. He immediately called upon 500,000 cavalry soldiers, planning to attack the Hebrews who had not gone far. Determined to destroy all the Hebrews completely, he sent his forces in pursuit. Moses soon heard from his scouts that Ramses was ruthlessly chasing the 400,000 slaves day and night. At this pace, Ramses would catch up in just 4 days. To escape, Moses quickly decided to lead the group towards the rough mountain paths. He knew the Egyptian army would use many chariots to chase them, and the narrow, steep mountain paths would slow them down. This plan helped them avoid the Egyptian army and reach the Red Sea 2 days earlier. When Ramses arrived at the fork in the road, knowing Moses well, Ramses also chose the narrow mountain path. Moses and the 400,000 Hebrews traveled day and night for 2 days and finally reached the Red Sea. But there was no way to cross now. With hundreds of thousands of pursuers rapidly closing in behind them, they were trapped with no escape. The slaves lost hope and lay down, resigned to their fate. Faced with this crisis, Moses spent the entire night in deep thought, thinking of his wife and children. Unwilling to give up, he hoped for one last act of divine intervention. Otherwise, all the Hebrews would perish here. However, this time the Hebrew God did not answer him. Frustrated, Moses threw his sword into the Red Sea, where it sank deep into the waters. Moses knew that trying to cross the sea by force would mean certain death by drowning. He sighed, realizing he had no other option, and decided to rest for the time being. In the middle of the night, he suddenly woke up to see a meteor streaking across the sky and seemingly falling into the sea far away. The next day, seagulls gathered on the sea's surface, and mysteriously, the water began to slowly recede. The sword Moses had thrown the night before was now visible on the seabed. This miraculous sight amazed the hundreds of thousands present. Moses stepped forward to retrieve his sword, understanding this was a divine sign from the Hebrew God. He gathered everyone and led them towards the other shore of the Red Sea. But with the strong currents ahead, everyone thought Moses was mad, and no one dared to take the first step. Only Moses knew this was God's revelation and said, "Follow me, and you will be free." Encouraged by Moses, the Hebrews placed their trust in him without delay. Gathering all their belongings, they followed Moses across the Red Sea. As they stepped into the sea, the water ahead turned into a shallow sandbank. Meanwhile, the Egyptian army was quickly closing in. The dangerous mountain paths made the soldiers anxious, knowing one wrong step could mean a deadly fall. Driven by the desire to catch the Hebrews, Ramses ignored all warnings and ordered his chariots to speed at 200 kilometers per hour. But the chariots were pushed beyond their limits. Commander Cain tried to warn Ramses, but his anger for his son blinded him. Suddenly, one chariot hit a rock and flipped over, throwing its guard underneath. The following chariots couldn't stop in time, causing a chain collision. The strong impact triggered massive landslides along the road. Before even reaching the Hebrews, Ramses had already lost more than half of his forces. Seeing the disaster unfold, Ramses realized it was a divine warning, but blinded by hatred, he ignored it and ordered the remaining chariots to rush forward at full speed. At last, they reached the Red Sea, just in time to see Moses leading the Hebrews farther ahead. Noticing Ramses' army coming down the hill, Moses urgently shouted, "Run! If we reach the mountains on the other side, we will be safe." He decided to stay back with 2,000 Hebrew men to face Ramses' army. As Ramses' vast force of 200,000 advanced, it seemed the two armies were ready to fight. The gloomy sky darkened further, lightning flashed, and a storm moved swiftly toward the battlefield. When the Hebrews reached the far shore, a frightening sight appeared. Multiple huge tornadoes spun together, and giant waves rose up suddenly, rushing toward the Egyptian troops. Everyone was overcome with fear they couldn't resist. Ramses was shocked to see this and realized the Hebrew god had acted again. Commander Kian told Ramses to fall back, but Ramses, furious and reckless, took control and charged ahead. As the natural disaster grew worse, Commander Kian refused to follow Ramses toward certain doom and ordered a retreat. Seeing this, Moses instructed everyone to pull back to the shore, to join the civilians and prepare for the final stand. As the two leaders closed the gap, massive waves rapidly neared the battlefield. Moses stood firm, ready to face Ramses' fury, but the waves moved too fast. The huge army of 200,000 couldn't escape and was swallowed by the sea. The charge of 500,000 soldiers ended in destruction. The expected battle between Ramses and Moses never happened as the waves consumed them both. Only the Hebrews who had moved to the mountains survived, protected by God's power. The Red Sea filled back up, and countless fallen soldiers floated on the water, becoming food for crocodiles. Those Hebrews who saw this miracle became deeply convinced of God's power and accepted the Hebrew God as their one true Lord. Moses survived by swimming ashore. God also spared Ramses, perhaps to show him who the real God was. Seeing his defeated soldiers become prey for seabirds, Ramses felt a heavy burden of guilt. Maybe only then did he truly understand. Moses led 400,000 Hebrews toward their ancestral land, Canaan. Passing through his wife's homeland, Moses reunited with his son and wife, who had long awaited him. When she saw the large crowd, Moses told her, "They are all my people." 3 months after leaving Egypt, Moses settled the 400,000 Hebrews in the wilderness of Sin. The Hebrew God, seeing the many people, shook his head. He called Moses up to the mountain and gave him the 10 Commandments, knowing they still had a long way to go. The Hebrews were so many, like a nation, and might be seen as invaders in Canaan. Many believed that with their numbers and unity, they could build a peaceful life. But Moses wondered if once settled, they would still share the same goals and unity. So, he created the 10 Commandments, carving them into stone tablets. These rules became a moral guide for future generations of Jews and Christians. The Hebrew God praised Moses' decision, saying, "Leaders fade away, but what is written on stone remains." These laws would lead them back to their sacred land, Canaan. After Moses died, wars continued and the people faced hardships. But it was no longer a battle between gods, but endless conflict among humans. Friends, if you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like. And make sure to leave a comment too. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and stay with me. Your love is my inspiration. Thank you so much for watching.